Thanks for being here. My name is Karissa Camona. I'm going to start us off with a little reading this morning, and then we're going to have a conversation. I know Thomas Mitchell is here, and I've been reading your poems a little bit this week, so I have some questions that maybe will guide us all, but if you have questions of your own or thoughts that pop up, let's just talk to each other. All right. So the poems that I'm going to read today are kind of in a Montana regionalist theme. In college, I moved away to the exotic land of Minnesota, and I started to differentiate myself from other people, I think, just to have a thing that was mine by asserting my Montana-ness really, really hard. And in doing that, I was surprised at myself at how much I sort of fell back on maybe stereotypical depictions of the West or themes about being a cowboy and things like that. And while I was out there, my grandma died, and after her death, there was a sale of our family land, so this person that I felt very safe with, this place that I felt very safe with was gone. And in that grieving process, I was, and having that identity shift of I am from Montana, the same thing was happening, just falling on these kind of traditional themes of the West. And so the first poem I'm going to read today was my first poem that I really tried exploring that. And then the rest are me working through that over the past few years. Also, pat on the back to y'all for getting up and coming to listen to poetry at 9 in the morning. That's awesome.
As long as there's donuts.
As long as there's donuts. Okay. To whosoever buys the ranch regarding Baylor's twine, our sincerest apologies for the Baylor's twine that's loosed itself from square bales and blows across the frozen barnyard like orange tumbleweed. Come spring, the twine will sink deep into the thaw, and you will harvest the stuff for years to come. Find bright tufts of fiber caught in the cat's claws, spun into the crow's nests in the poplars, and, when you least expect it, balled up in the toe of your boot. When you find those weedish lengths of the twine we left, don't trust them to your pockets, only to snag on barbed wire, fall back to the windswept earth. Wrap the twine like a bandage around the width of your palm. Tie it tight, an old string reminder. Thumb the knot, and you will know it's still there. We kept our twine piled in an old salsa jar next to the wood box, made tight-wound skeins for fire starting, saved the loose strands for bridal repair and latching broken gates shut. Maybe you will save yours under the sink by the compost, maybe in a pellet bag on the tack shed floor. Maybe you will dream up some use more deft or beautiful, braid it into jewelry, pot holders, a great neon lasso to hold in a blizzard when you've lost your way home. Maybe you will find it all. Draw twine from every haystack, straw bed, split hoof. Climb the poplars with scissors at dawn. Turn these fields over and more over still. Sift homestead through your fingers until the twine stops catching and your nail beds are dark with a soil that is good and clean and black. I was also watching a lot of Marie Kondo when I wrote that poem. Soothing myself. She's a famous organizer, and she has this concept of kind of cleaning out your life and thanking things as you're letting them go. And that was what I was trying to do with that poem. The next one, welcome, hi. Don't worry about it. We're gonna have a little conversation after this. I'm glad you came. This next one's called Instagram Homesteaders, and is an intersection of jealousy, obsession, and admiration, which I feel is a crossroads I'm often at. Instagram homesteaders. I eat their days for breakfast. It's a good, leafy feed. There is always a braid, thick, burnished, flung over shoulder. Always a baby, face full of mud. Never cupboards, just floating slab shelves, bacon fat out in the open, blurring the sides of a patterned glass jar. Like, nothing to hide here. Like, there are no wickermen stashed in the barn. The rooster only crows at dawn. I'm jealous most when I've scrolled my fill, screen dark, my own framed field with night pouring out of it. Through my work, I helped conduct the point in time survey. Welcome. Make yourself comfortable. Hey. Disembodied voice. Welcome. Through work I helped conduct the point in time survey, which is an annual survey counting folks who are unhoused on one night in the month of January, which if you ask me is a bad month to count folks who are sleeping outside. And that survey is dysfunctional in a lot of ways, but as I was conducting it, the most frustrating aspect of it was like that an annoying woman with a pen and paper showing up to folks' door, asking them to answer all of these questions about why they're unhoused, and the answers are bubble answers. So it's like, why are you unhoused? And that's a huge story, right? And it's like, and you can choose from A, this, B, that. And I think this poem was just a response to try to access more spaciousness, because it's such a rich experience. You're seeing so much of people's world. People were super gracious with me and invited me into their spaces, and I was dissatisfied with the form, so I made my own. Alternative questions for the HUD Homelessness Survey, Bitterroot Family Campground, January 2022. 1. What is your name, and how'd you come by it? Did your mother cup her hand and dip into the soft dark of a dream, family Bible, cosmos? Did she fall in love with a foreign word for the moon? Or were you the first to know yourself, to hook that sound from your throat, let it fill your mouth and eat, eat, eat of its richness? 2, what is your age, i.e. your mileage, your baggage? Which is your most favorite pearlescent scar? The one you fiddle with like a loose tooth or wedding band? The one that pinks up when you press on it, that you mark in crude initials with your thumbnail? The one that your blood remembers just as sure as the day you were opened up? 3, where will you sleep tonight? What will you wake to? First light refracted in the car windows, dew dripped in your breath, chapped lips, crusted tear ducts, your bladder, full, panging, warm, the dog sighing her own complaints. Outside, dry cold, dawn over the sapphires, and faintly Venus. How long do you think it has before it fades in the sun? Sure.
These last 3 poems, which have been magnificent.
Sure. Thank you. I like cowboy lingo. It's fascinating. Grew up around it. My dad watches Bonanza like it's his job. And this poem is just me like playing with that language and trying to ride the line between like playing with that language and calling it out a little bit, calling out those some of those themes that I find in myself. If your tongue ain't cinched right around that beast Western heritage, you'll slide up underneath her and fall on your back. You'll go plumb dizzy, head swimming with stars and hooves and the cowlicks in the underbelly of her pinto coat. You know, chromatics, black calluses on each of her forelegs called night eyes staring down. It don't matter how many knots you tie above the girth, or that you call them bowline knots like little Joe does. You can say, howdy partner. You can say, tenderfoot, greenhorn. You can say that today was as long and as yellow as your heritage's teeth. You can say that you know what it means to ride like the sun, grass lit up by the glint of your spurs, walking from one edge of this earth to the other, but you don't. See, this old hoss is just holding her breath, puffing up with air. And what you've got to do is shoulder that strap, your tongue, and pull it as tight as you can against her. Dig your boots in and wait for her exhale, the feel of her ribs. Then go on, chew, get along, little doggy. Sit on the true shape of your horse. Will you like to join this circle? You can totally join and decide if you want. You can also stay there if you're more comfortable. It's whatever you want. All right, folks. Last one. This one's called adjustment. So my grandma, who ran that ranch by herself for many years, would always have me pick rocks when I'd come and stay with her. Ooh, if you've ever picked rocks, it's not a particularly stimulating task. So this is about that. Adjustment. That summer, I was extended to you as a post-divorce gift. An extra hand. I was 13. You wore a silk slip and tucked it into jeans when people came around the house. We ate pizza and snow peas exclusively. Siesta'd, listened to big band, top 100, gospel truth radio. It was the first time I'd ever wondered what it might be like to live alone. That summer, we picked rock from the pasture for weeks with crowbars, driving them into the soil, levering damp slate slabs up from the ground. I swore at you then, when your back was turned. What the fuck did the field care for a few more or less stones? Now, I know what it means to want to pry something up from the earth, to test yourself against its weight. Hold your breath, shake, eyes closed, and see the lid pink sun. To bite down hard, to hear the sound the rock makes, like a bone returning to its socket.
Like applaud.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. So yeah, as you can tell, my poems are filtered through region and landscape a lot. And I'll pose this question to Thomas because I know your name. But also anyone who wants to respond to this.
This guy's name is Thomas. Too.
Also Thomas. Yes, I know you are a poet. But there are lots of poets here. What is your relationship to landscape and region? And then within that, what do you always gravitate towards? Like, what are the wounds that you worry or images that like just won't get out of your head? I know these change from season to season, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, obviously, since we work with Hugo, we have, there's a strong sense of place. And the attachment is always for here in Montana. Does this thing on?
No. Oh. Hold it up close.
Yeah? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. But I live in Coos Bay, Oregon, and so I have a different environment. And for many years, I've lived near the water. So images about water, life-sustaining, come in and out of my poetry. And I was in the Navy for 4 years, floating on the sea, you know, so had lots of time to think about it. And I was born on Long Island, so yeah, that's the way it works for me. But I think probably I'm not too different than most people. I really don't know what I'm going to be writing about when I look at the blank page. But usually there is a strong sense of place.
Sure. Does anybody else want to answer that question? I'm too. Not you. We can all go around too and introduce ourselves just so we can use names and things like that.
I'm kind of donut. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sitting here listening and thinking about donuts at the same time. So,
you're going for the
I'm going for donuts.
We like to hear you shoot.
I'm with this guy.
A little donut ASMR. I am down.
Yeah, that can be poetic.
Yes. So again, I'm Karissa Camona. I'm hail from the Bitterroot. Drove up last night. Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself, Chivo?
My name is Eusebio Carmona. I'm original from Mexico. I came to the United States in 1984. I met my wife in 85. We live in California for several years. Eli was born in California, and my other son was born in California too. My daughter was born here in Montana. After coming on and off here to the ranch, my wife decided it was better for us to move, or for her to move back with the kids and me here to Montana. So, because I was here in 86 with her, and my English was really poor. I have a hard time because there weren't a lot of people that spoke my language. And also I was going to move away from my family. But also I thought about a better environment for my kids. So we decided to move in 95. So the boys grew up here. They were young when they came. Eli was only a few months. So I'm glad that I make the move. I know sometimes it's hard, and I've listened to the poetry, and I'm listening to, like you talking about water. Sometimes I think about where I grew up, and when I was younger also I wanted to write books. And one of the things that I still have someplace in the house, there's a book that I started writing about me and my brother. We have 2 goats. And after school, we'll take the goats up into the pastures, and we taught the goats to listen to us. So when we whistle, they will come running after us. So the book is someplace, or that the starting of the book is someplace in my papers. So maybe some days after listening to you guys, maybe I'll finish the book. So. Yeah, once again, my name is Eusebio Carmona, but my nickname is Chevo, so it's easier, Chevo.
Hi, I'm Julian. They, he, she pronouns. You can call me whatever you want. I grew up in New Jersey and Massachusetts, right by the ocean, so a lot of my poems speak to that. I also grew up by the Pine Barrens, so I write about trees. Quite a lot of trees as my guardians and teachers. And now that I moved here to Montana, I write about the mountains quite a bit, so landscape's a big influence for me. Happy to be here.
Hi, my name's Maggie Carmona. I'm Eli's mom, Chevo's wife, Carissa's mother-in-law. I grew up on a ranch in Montana and was able to return there. And just enjoy the land very much.
My name is Tom Aslan. I grew up in Palouse, and so some of my writing takes place there, at least as a jumping off place. Some of it returns to Missoula, because I love Missoula. It's a great place. And as Tom mentioned before, we had Dick Hugo as our teacher, and his influence stays, mainly the things he said in class. I'll give you one example real quick. A friend turned in a poem, and it had a bee on the wiper, and that image was repeated several times. And so Dick said, "You sure are milking the piss out of that bee." And that tells you a lot about rewriting.
You always had to be ready.
So I'm Michael Johnson. I'm from living in Maine right now, and oddly enough, I'm writing about White Sulphur Springs, Montana, while living in Maine, working with about an African American family that moved out there in late 1800s, and I've been to White Sulphur several times, but haven't lived there. It's just in terms of landscape, it's a very odd experience to go to a landscape that you've read about more than you've experienced, right? And it's sort of trying to come to terms with this place that I actually know better as the 1890s than I do as 2020s.
Hi, I'm Megan. Originally from Detroit, Michigan. Been in Missoula or all over Montana since 22 years. And yeah, I work for Humanities Montana as their grants manager, so I'm here sneaking around as a site visit kind of thing. But I also write poetry, but I have never actually shared it with anybody. So that today, probably not the day. But I'm gonna listen and be inspired, so.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bruce Smith. I'm from Bozeman. Went to school in Missoula, got my college degrees here. I'm a wildlife biologist. I've worked through the West, mostly with large mammals, and I'm an author of nonfiction, and I've written a lot about conservation and natural history, so I'm obviously inspired by the kind of work I've done and what I've experienced working with and living among animals, like 2 years living in the Selway Bitterroot with mountain goats. I wrote a book about mountain goats. And now I'm writing children's novels with environmental themes. And two of the characters in the second book, which I talked about yesterday, and it will again tomorrow morning in the children's series, two of the characters in the second book in this series, Legend Keepers, are Native American. And I spent several years working with Native Americans, and so that experience also inspires kind of how I feel about the world, trying to see it through their eyes, and then that's reflected in my work.
Hi, my name's Eli Carmona. Joe was my dad, Meg's my mom, Chris my wife. I was born in California, came out to Montana when I was 6 months old, and have been trying to support Karissa. She writes poetry. I write poetry, I guess. Kind of kid-ish poetry, very simple poetry, nothing compared to what Karissa can do. But yeah, it's very fun to listen to her read and then to listen to all you guys share your thoughts.
Okay, Eli says he's not better than me, but he does this really annoying thing where like I'm trying really hard to write a poem, he's like, I'll inspire you, and then knocks one out in like 10 minutes. So I don't know who's more skilled here.
My name is Jason Thoreau. I'm from Missoula. So it's kind of interesting thinking about landscape because it's definitely, I guess it influences me. I mean, how could like not having a horizon around you every day, trees and stuff. I don't write about landscape per se. I mean, sometimes, but I guess I like to just kind of deconstruct language. So I'm more of a concrete poetry with, it's probably philosophy and politics. So ideas. Man, I don't know. But
Is there something you return to again and again in terms of ideas, or?
Whether it's just, just a general oppression. Because you see it. I've seen Missoula change so much, and just consumerism and just kind of the state of the nation, where our priorities are as people. Sometimes, sometimes the heart's left out of it, I guess. Yeah, and it's early in the morning. But I told myself, I was like, oh, 9 o'clock. This is me talking about like 4 in the morning going, yeah, if I'm up, I'll make it. And I'm like, oh, dang it, I did. So, but thank you for sharing. And yeah, let's continue this.
Yeah.
I'm Arizona. I'm also from the Bitterroot. I do write a little bit of poetry, and then I'm also do some visual art. I don't find my sense of place influencing my writing very often. It's more kind of like personal events and experiences. But my visual art is very much influenced by kind of my natural surroundings pretty often. So yeah.
I'm Marina Ritchie, and I wanted to shout out to Bruce. We had a lovely opportunity to spontaneously almost fill in an open slot yesterday and read together, and found quite a bit of synergy in our kinship with nature and the wild and animals, and that's been a big theme of mine. And but I grew up in the National Park Service and had like a pivotal moment living 2 years at that kind of age when everything's so magical when you're 8 and 9 years old in the middle of the park. And I never looked back. It's like, no matter where we live, I'm going to be in the West, close to mountains, close to wild places. And I lived in Missoula for quite a long time. Went to graduate school here in 86 to 88 in journalism, and then was here off and on. I was in Helena for a bit, but here till 2015, and then I moved back to Oregon, which is where I'd been before. And I'm here because I'm so excited to have a published book out that I feel really proud of. It's called Halcyon Journey in Search of the Belted Kingfisher, and a lot of it takes place here, and so it's very much an exploration of home and how you think you know a place until you really don't, until you immerse deeply. And this hope that maybe that reaches other people to have that experience, because if I hadn't followed a bird and really wanted to know about it on Rattlesnake Creek, I wouldn't have been out in the blizzard. I wouldn't have been out in the dark. I wouldn't have been out, so, and by doing that, the whole community of life comes together. And so I do love writing poetry too. I'm a nature writer, journalist, but I'm very drawn to poetry, and I think the older I get, the more I'm realizing how the wound, that your life is full of love and loss and grief, and then so that also I carry this incredible depth of feeling for wild places and forests and birds. And I see how they start to inform each other and strengthen poetry. And I'm finding ways to write about personal grief and loss and through nature poetry. And I took a class at, I don't know, do you guys know Fish Trap Writers Gathering? It's a beautiful place, and I totally recommend it. It's up on Wallowa Lake in northeast Oregon, in the right Chief Joseph homeland. And it's a great gathering of authors and poets. And I took a workshop there this summer with Erin Abeta, who's an amazing poet, and talked a lot about the wound and how to express that, and I felt like I gained quite a bit. So also going on too long, but I just want to thank you. Your poetry is gorgeous.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for
Thanks.
coming. Hi, I'm Kay. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I wrote in a little book about what I wanted to be when I grew up, and there were 3 blanks. So I said I want to be an author, a poet, or a waitress. So I have done a little bit of all 3. I have always fancied myself a writer, but it's nothing I'd share. I actually took that challenge, the November Writers Challenge, where you write a novel in 30 days. And I wrote a novel in 30 days, but it's definitely under the bed. And most of the poetry I write is in the form of limericks to friends, you know, like da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, that kind of stuff. I've moved here recently from the Atlanta area, grew up in St. Louis, went to college in California, lived in Portland, and seen Coos Bay and other things like that, but just moved here in June, and I'm so very happy to be here, meeting and getting involved with book folks. And like you said, your poetry is awesome. Thank you very much. It's very inspiring.
Thank you all so much for sharing. It's so exciting to see all of the ways that we're, like all of the different places that we're coming from, and randomly connecting here today. Some of us wouldn't have made it. Some of us would have slept in. I might have slept in. Okay, Thomas's, if you don't mind if I call you the Toms. You brought up Richard Hugo, and I just read The Triggering Town this year, which is his sort of on writing book, and it was a game changer. I felt like I was really late to it coming from this area. If you don't know Richard Hugo, he is like the Northwest regional and like beyond regional poet. And he has this idea, if I'm capturing it correctly, where there's like a triggering subject, right? And then there's the poet's emotional landscape. And the triggering subject, which for him was oftentimes like post-industrial Montana towns, is almost a filter to get the truth of that emotional landscape out there. And then the poem might be really different from the reality of, say, like Phillipsburg. Like, you know, there's a lot of projection going on. And I was just curious for all of you, and Toms, please correct me if I'm misunderstanding that concept, but is that the truth for you when you write? Do you try to stay with or just observe reality really deeply? How much of you is in it? How do you convey the self through writing? That is a convoluted question, but if anyone wants to give it a go at answering.
When I write, I try to adhere to the emotional truth of a poem. So, in other words, I try to, Hugo used to say, write as hard as you can. And so I try to stay true to the emotion that is coming across, you know, the page. And that's not a very good answer. But Tom, you want to?
Well, thanks, Tom.
My pleasure.
I don't know if I can help much as far as this goes, but I remember some of the things he used to say to us. He'd say things like, can you imagine a man spending his whole life doing a silly thing like writing poetry, you know, things like that. He was very connected to reality. And he also said to us, he said, I can only teach you how to write like I do. Well, that was wonderful because, it was absolutely an incredible writer. But I couldn't write like Richard Hugo. I mean, there's no way. I had to learn to write like Tom Mitchell. And it was, I mean, I can't tell you how grateful I am to have been there and to have had the opportunity to learn some of these things. But it was a big mistake for me to try to write like Hugo. It was a flop. There's no way I could do it. And, but you know, imitation is okay. The imitation, that's a good place to begin. But I don't write about triggering towns. Matter of fact, I hardly write about towns at all. I write about experience. I write about all kinds of things. Anything that comes along is eligible to be a topic for a poem. I don't know about you guys, but I've gotten to the point where I don't, like I said, I don't know what's good. I get up in the middle of the night and write a poem. I mean, it's kind of scary sometimes. You know? I'm asleep, my wife is next to me, and all of a sudden, I just feel like is this some kind of illness, or what is this? You know? And I get up out of bed, and sometimes I write an entire poem, but usually it's in fragments. And then I spend the rest of the time trying to put it all together in my own way. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is to discover your own way of writing, your uniqueness, you know. And it sure helps to read a lot of poetry and a lot of different kinds of poets. Latin American poets are one of the finest. And so Gary Soto, and people like that. There's such a rich field out there, and there's so many poets today. My God, it's hard to get published, you know, because there's so many people out there trying to get published. It's kind of like a renaissance of poetry. But anyway, I've already said too much, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
So I don't think I have it, because I guess what I write, or what I've been writing, is biography and nonfiction. So I guess in some ways I'm very much aware that I want to get the history and the story accurate. So, and then in some ways, what I want to do is disappear. Right? So it's not really something where I'm interested in my emotions. I want to make sure that the emotions of the individuals, I guess, are expressed. But I think it's a very different thing in terms of writing poetry versus writing a biography, which I want to be very careful that I'm true to the story and the lives that the people led.
I'm really curious though, with that process. Oh, yes. It says it's on. All good biographies and those types of writings that I've read do have like voice. So what do you do to capture that? Like, do you tap into the voices of the people that you're studying? How do you, I don't know, get the zhuzh, get the vibe, I guess?
I mean, it sounds kind of weird to say this, because I'm writing about someone who died in 1968, but I sort of began thinking of writing the biography as a collaboration, right? And that I am collaborating with her, but I'm doing so through things that she wrote, right? Because she wrote like letters to the newspaper, but also wrote letters and other things. And what I want to do is, I want to make it as much her story as possible, given that I'm the person making the decisions, of course. But I think in terms of where the vibe comes from, I think comes from the characters, right? From the people whose lives that you're trying to get into print, right? And the stories you're trying to help tell. But for me, I think it really helps that she wrote things, and that gives me a kind of access to her interiority that is not as a fiction writer that I would normally not be able to do.
Sure. Welcome. Hi. If you want to introduce yourself, you are totally welcome to. I also recognize that like coming in, having somebody be like, tell us about yourself is kind of intense. So whenever you want to come in, we're just having a conversation about poetry. The question that I asked, geez, a while ago and I don't quite remember it, is what's that?
At least that's how.
Oh, how like yourself comes through your writing, if it does, and whoever wants to answer, or doesn't.
I just wanted to say one thing. Tom, I don't think you're nuts. And if you are, we
You
both
better talk
are.
to my wife.
I can relate to that. And if you are, we both are, because since I started writing fiction, my characters wake me up at night and say they have things to say. So I know what it's like getting up in the middle of the night, going to the computer because you have something important to put down.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to kind of like that emotion and like self coming through your poetry. So I do a lot of slam poetry, which if you're not familiar with that, I call it the teenage angst genre of poetry. It's very like performance, very...
Poetry now?
Yeah, slam poetry, it's another level. It's another... So I think there is a lot of emotion within that, and one of the things that kind of came to mind is at one point I was dating another poet, which that's a choice. But anyway, I just remember they were talking. We were in a group of friends, and they were talking about, yeah, I just haven't been creating as much, you know. And one of our friends looks at them and said, "Oh well, it's because you're happy." And so just kind of this like concept that I think is interesting of just like speaking your truth and like needing that kind of like emotional charge almost in order to get there sometimes. I don't think that's necessarily true for everyone or every form of poetry. But just that like, I don't know, reflecting on, because that's very true for my own poetry, as I find I'm only writing when I'm like feeling really intense about something. So I don't know. I don't know if that's relevant or if that makes sense, but yeah, anyway.
Julian, I'm interested in you speaking to this if you want to. Sure. Okay.
Okay, hold on, let me gather my thoughts.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, when I started getting back into writing, I was in AmeriCorps and I was traveling all over the country, mostly South Dakota and Iowa, and Georgia and Jersey, and kind of just bouncing all around, living kind of a pretty nomadic lifestyle at the time. And so my writing is a lot of just almost capturing little snapshots of what's going on around me, almost as if I'm walking around with a camera and taking pictures, and then just kind of using that, assigning some sort of emotional weight that I was feeling at the time to those images. So, for instance, I think about, I lived in Savannah, Georgia for a short time, for 2 months when I was on a project, and at that time I was transitioning and going through a lot of really heavy emotional upheaval and figuring out my life and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and I was fleeing some domestic violence back in Jersey, and so my life was just very tumultuous, and I was living on a wildlife center where I was doing this construction project, and there were these huge ponds that would fill up with algae, and so I would just go and sit by the ponds and reflect a lot on how clouded the pond was and how I couldn't see the bottom, and how that algae sort of represented that. So just little snapshots. I'm a bit of a slut for symbolism, so specific nature, and nature is a really huge driving force for that. I know I'm not unique in that in poetry, but yeah, that's kind of, I use poetry for some deep emotional processing that's not really possible for me outside of writing. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Thomas Aslan, do you have anything you want to say about this, the self in poetry?
No.
Totally fine. I think we
I'm
have
sort of blanking out.
It's all right. And if somebody comes to you later, it's totally fine. Do you? Anybody else have anything to say? We do have about 15 minutes left. I want to invite if anybody has new work that they want to share, old work they want to share. Come on in to the circle, or I can ask more questions. It's all good. Or a poem that you've been reading a lot, like over and over again. That is also okay. Awesome. Thank you.
I went to a poetry workshop a little bit ago, and let me just pull it up, but they had posed a bunch of different questions to us, and we got to choose from the list of questions which one we wanted to write about. And it was short. I wrote it in, 10 minutes or so, but one of the questions was, who was responsible for the suffering of your mother? It was a deep question. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna do this now? Okay. So just give me one moment and I will, actually, I think I have it in my little book here. Yeah. Okay, so I'll read it. Who was responsible for the suffering of your mother? It was a man. Not any particular man, deserving of any distinguishable characteristics, but rather an amorphous man, many men, in fact, with blurry faces and hands rough, like something artificial and wrong. Men with sharp bodies that cut deep and fast, men smoking slack-jawed cigarettes, and men with around-the-clock shadow. Men who turn away when they should look, and look when they should turn away. Righteous men who practice law and think they know how the world works. Men with icy blue eyes that are cold and distant. Men who talk more than they listen, who bellow loudly in the supermarket, who hide their shame in reality TV and pints of ice cream. And if that wasn't bad enough, there were also men who spoke gently and laughed like music. There were men who had deep brown eyes that held you endlessly. Men who were a cave you could rest in. Men who held your heart like a newborn baby. Men you trusted, and men you kissed, and men you married, and men you danced with on starry nights. Anybody else?
Are people pulling things up on the phones? I see maybe some of that happening. And I'll just let it breathe for a second, if that's the case. And two, if any other questions are coming up for folks that they just want to pose to the group.
I want to read your book about goats.
Yes.
I know it's someplace like I went to a technical school in Mexico, and my teacher told me that anybody can write a book. Is what he told me. So I used to write more when I was in Mexico. I don't do it now. But a few times when Karissa came to the ranch, I asked her, I told her I have a good ideas for you to write children books. And one of the things that, it's like, I hear about your emotions, or when you are in places, it reminds you or makes you write or think about. We have 2 horses and we have a dog. And I told Karissa, there's a book, you can write a book about that. And I said, the dog and the 2 horses, so my 2 horses. And when I'm referring to that, I'm referring like I'm speaking through the dog because I mean the dog likes the horses a lot. And then on the other side we have the chickens. So
I'm into the chicken story. Can you talk about the chicken that has been segregated from the other chickens?
So this is kind of funny. A couple years ago, we bought like 10 chickens. 5 they were red, or 12. They were red, and the other ones were like black and white. And I took a picture one day, and it's kind of funny how they were separated. They were the black ones and white, and the red ones on one side. And I talked to one of my co-workers, and I said, you know, even the animals, they have sometimes these prejudices, like, you know, separation here, and I don't believe in that. I believe that every human has the right to be whatever they want, and not because the color of our skin that we're different. My mom taught me that when you bleed, it's the same color. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. So this chicken, she thought that she was a mother, or she was going to have babies. So you know how they are when they go to the nest, and they spend a lot of times, and they talk. So the other chickens got kind of upset or mad, and they start like picking on her, and she got kind of beat up. So I decided to take it to the garden, and she will follow Maggie, she will follow me, everybody that went into the garden, she will follow So I told Karissa that I wanted to write a book about that. Yeah, but I never did. So I come with these ideas, but maybe someday I will start. But I would like to write stories about kids. And especially when I go back where I came from, there's a lot of things that all the history, the games that I used to play, they don't do it anymore. My grandpa, grandma, they used to get us around like a fireplace, and they will tell us stories. Or they will tell stories about how the donkey, how the horse behave, and what they knew about the weather and stuff like that. We don't do it anymore. So I think it's kind of late for me to try to talk to my grandpa. He's dead, my grandma's dead, a lot of my relatives. So for me, I'm trying to get maybe talk to my mom and get those stories back. And maybe I will, but I would like to write a book someday. So.
And there are kids who want to read it.
Totally.
But I will let you know when I finish the 2 goats.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Good question. So for those of you that write and share, what is your motivation for sharing? What possesses you to say, oh, I want to share this thought, these poems, this work with other people?
I'd love to answer that. I think for years I said I can't be a poet. I've never taken a poetry class, so I can't be a poet. And it's like at some point you just give yourself permission, and you go, I am writing poetry. It may not be, may not have had a good class in poetry, but and I took a class from Kim Stafford, who's a wonderful Oregon poet, during COVID online, and I loved where he just encourages people to, there is this side of like, oh, you got to revise your poem, make it perfect, but he was more like, you know what, sometimes you just put it out there in its undone way. And he had you put us poetry, he had ideas for take a little piece of paper, and when you return a library book, include your poem on a piece of paper. in the library book, or tuck a little piece of poetry in a jacket, you know, and at the dry cleaner, if you do that kind of thing. And I love that, so I feel like, oh, ever since that, actually, I have a personal blog, and so I put poetry out periodically on my blog, and it never feels finished, it never feels quite there, and I still have this editor in my head going, that's not good enough. But I also feel like, well, you know, it's just motivating other people to share their poetry, and we're all poets, and so the little bravery too. That's my thought. I guess at that I was going to say maybe I will.
Yes.
I just joined. So Tom and I just met here, but I spent a lot of time in Coos Bay, and we have a mutual friend, poet Anis Casals, and she talked me into joining an ekphrastic poetry group. You know, so you look at a visual and do. So I just started it a week and a half ago, and I thought, well, you know, I think so I published 3 of my ekphrastic poems like 2 days ago on my blog. But so this one I thought kind of goes with the children's theme. So I'm just going to tell you about the picture because you can't see it. And the description is it's a mural, and in the Clarion Alley mural in San Francisco, and from the 1980s, and it's a mural about the animals which lived in the area before it was settled and became a city. So this is my poem, A Child Named Fern. Rufescent brown bear sniffs rippling orbs of the once clearest creek. He's nose to nose with a pike, if only he knew hunger again. Spotted salamander examines leopard frog commenting, are we kin? Or sad ghosts forgetting the hop and crawl. Immense Chinook salmon lifts his fin in a sideways wave of forgotten sunrise, inviting raccoons to the cornucopia when there was plenty for all. Night heron whispers to bittern, watch out for that wood duck pair about to glide right over your toes. And how are you standing on water? Snakes live, skunk family picnic, the wary hare, and blue butterfly rustle, fuss, fume, and sigh in longing below the concrete sidewalk. Until one small girl named Fern, because her mother loved Charlotte's Web, plunked herself down, ear to pavement, and heard what no one else noticed. She began to blow softly on one crack where a dandelion grew, until the walkway split in 2, spilling well-heeled walkers tumbling back into their childhood. And the animals waltzed right on up. The creek bubbled and spilled, billowed, flooded, and began the renewal that would save San Francisco. That's the first time I've read that poem.
Yeah, to piggyback on what you were saying about just getting stuff out there, I think like really taking those rejections that say like keep sending stuff to heart is good. Because if they say that, I feel like you have to take their word, the all-powerful editor's word on that. Is there anyone else who would like to share any poetry or has a thought?
I just wanted to answer your question as to like why I share poetry, and I find it's just a really good outlet for healing and community. So it's, you know, you can write about pretty vulnerable things sometimes. So I think just having that like shared space and being received in that can be a really wonderful thing. So yeah.
Well, I want to leave these last few minutes open just for some mingling. I know, like, I'm always really bad about following through on the mingle, so, like, get people's numbers. Chevo, you have a lot of interest in these children's books. Get people's numbers. Talk about your blog, like, share all of that with folks. And I would like to, one, honor John Robinson, Eli's grandpa, who was a poet and writer and just passed away this year. just want to thank him for the writing energy in your family, and honor the indigenous people of these land, the Kalispel people and the Salish people. I know it's really easy to do land acknowledgements and be like, oh, check the box. So some action to follow that would be awesome. One organization that does a lot of great for our community in general is All Nations Health Center, and they're working on Project Beacon. There's also tons of amazing organizers around missing and murdered Indigenous people. Ivy and Ivan McDonald have a great documentary in the works that I believe, I don't know when it's coming out, but look them up, Google some shit. Yeah, thanks for being here.